There's a kind of faith that only really makes sense in retrospect when you look backwards. As a church, we've been walking through a series on our ethos, who we are as a church together, and we ended last week with the value of Scripture, and we talked about Paul. Paul was a man who had his life changed in an instant, and yet was continually being changed and shaped slowly over time. Faith practice over time, not just perfected in an instant. And I see that kind of picture very clearly in Scripture, and I also see it clearly in people. Corner Church is a story like that, really a collection of stories like that. 20 years of people showing up, of never having enough, but somehow just having enough. And the longer I'm part of this community, the more I realize that some of the most meaningful moments, they really only make sense in hindsight. And so that's why we're sharing stories today. So I'm going to tell you a couple quick stories. Before Minneapolis, before I even knew what Corner was, I knew Scott and Amber. Through my previous job, we became friends, and even then, even with a younger, dumber, less immature version of myself, I could see Jesus at work clearly in the type of faith that they lived out. Not perfection, for sure. Not polish, right? Not completeness, but faithfulness. A willingness to keep showing up, to keep trusting, to keep trying. Keep trying. And my understanding of who Jesus is has grown a lot since then, but even back then, I couldn't deny that Jesus was at work in the life of Scott and Amber. Years later, Kelsey and I joined the team, and Rich shared a little bit about Corner Northeast, and I want to share a little bit more about some of those stories there. Before Corner Church Northeast was even on our radar, I met Jody. Hi, Jody. You're the best. I was doing some photography work for a friend who had a marketing company, and she said, "You should meet Jody." I said, "Okay, I'll show up. I'll go over there." So I met with Jody, and she had this beautiful co-working and event space in Northeast. And the space was stunning, but what really stood out to me is why she built it. She wanted to create a room for people, for connection, for gathering, for collaboration, for care of one another. Her relationship with faith at the time was complicated. Is that fair? Yeah. But her commitment to do something good for her community was unmistakable. She built something open and generous without even knowing what it might become. She asked if I'd bring the coffee cart in every Saturday morning. It was mid-2020. Nobody knew what was safe. Nobody came to the coffee cart. By most measures, it didn't work, but we became friends. We didn't talk much about faith or church, but we had fun, we laughed, we stayed connected, and I kind of felt like that was the whole story. There's also another story I think about often. Rich alluded to it. Anna. Hi, Anna. She had been managing what was the Beat Coffee House back then, which is now Corner Coffee Uptown, before Kelsey and I were on the team. And pretty quickly after Kelsey and I moved up here, she and Rich stepped away to serve families at Camp Lebanon. It was faithful. It was the right for that season, but it still stretched me, the reality that people can walk different paths and still be moving towards Christ. At the time, their leaving was unsettling. Someone you just met make a big move to leave the team you just joined. Part of you wonders, was that me? Did I do something? I'm kind of too scared to ask Anna if that's the truth. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, right? I had to wrestle with the idea that God's leading in someone else's life might not resolve around my own comfort or expectations or ideals or even what I might think is best. And it's only much later that these stories touched Jody and Anna. Rich and Anna began discerning about a return to Minneapolis. Northeast was on their heart, so I was like, hey, I know somebody up there. You should get together, Jody. And I wish I could say I was smart enough to put two and two together. I wasn't. I was just like, hey, I know one person in Northeast. You should talk to them. Only in hindsight do I fully realize what happened. Something Jody had been faithfully building met something Anna and Rich were faithfully carrying. A faithful walk over time has a way of meeting other faithful walks over time. And that stays with me. There's so many stories like this at Corner Church. Some we know. Some we may never know. Some we don't. We don't know how they'll end or what they'll require. But I do know that God is at work, that He is ahead of us, and that trusting God is deeply connected to trusting people. So I'm going to ask you a dialogue question, and then Scott's going to come kind of move us forward. But where do you see a season, a relationship, an ordinary moment in your life that didn't feel important at the time, but you can now see it was quietly shaping you? And what does that help you notice about how Jesus works?